In the previous part of this lecture, we examined the ethical challenges raised by interstellar and deep space exploration. We saw how utilitarian, Kantian, and Rice-based ethical frameworks help us to evaluate exploration not merely as a technical advancement but as a moral undertaking. We now turn to the concept that connects all of these frameworks in many ways, which gives them in their greatest urgency. That is, the concept is the duty owed to the future generation. Duties to the future generation occupy a unique position in ethics. Unlike present population, future generation cannot express preferences, asserts right, or participate in governance. Yet, the decision taken today, particularly in the outer space, will shape the world they inherit in profound and irreversible ways. Space ethics, therefore, focuses us to confront a fundamental moral question. Do we owe obligation to the people who do not yet exist? And if so, what is the nature of these obligations? Outer space intensifies this question because space activities operates on a temporal scales that far exceed ordinary political or economic planning. Satellites remain in orbit for decades. Orbital debris may persist for centuries. Alteration to celestial bodies may last for millions of years. When we act in space, we are not merely acting for ourselves, we are acting on the behalf of humanity across the time. From a utilitarian perspective, duties to future generations arise from the need to maximize overall welfare across the time, but not merely in the present. If the moral objective is to maximize human well being, then the interest of future persons must be included in the ethical calculations. A decision that benefits millions of today but imposes the severe risk on the billions of tomorrow cannot be easily justified even if immediate gains appear substantial. In the context of outer space, this utilitarianism becomes the most especially significant. Orbital congestions provide a clear example. The proliferation of satellite may generate immediate benefits in communication and commerce. Yet, the accumulation of debris increases the risk of cascading collisions, which is potentially rendering certain orbits unusable. If the future generation lose the access to space because of a decision made today, then the net utility over the time may be the negative. Utilitarian ethics therefore supports the strong duties of restraint, sustainability, and long-term planning in the space activities. However, utilitarianism alone is insufficient. It struggles to explain why we should limit our actions today for the sake of people who do not yet exist, particularly when the benefits to the future generation are uncertain or intangible. This is where Kantian ethics adds depth of the concept of intergenerational duty. Kantian ethics grounds moral obligation in duty rather than outcome. It requires us to act according to the principles that can be universalized. When applied across the time, this principle has powerful implications. If we adopt a maxim that allows the present generation to exhaust the shared resources, pollute the common environment, or the monopolize access to the space, we must ask whether such maxim could be universalized across generations. Certainly, it cannot. If every generation behaved in this way, future generations would be left with nothing. The very possibility of moral agency in the future would be undermined. Kantian ethics therefore implies that we have a duty to preserve the condition that make the moral choice and the human flourishing possible for those who come after us. Outer space is increasingly one of those conditions. Access to the space affects communication, climatic monitoring, scientific knowledge, and the most important, that is security on Earth. To degrade or monopolize space today is to deny the future generations the capacity to act freely and rationally in that domain. Kantian reasoning also emphasized the moral wrongness of treating future generation merely as a means to the present ends. If we exploit space resources aggressively to satisfy short-term economic or strategic goals, we are effectively using the future humans as a dumping ground for the risk and scarcity. This violates the Kantian requirement to treat all persons, including future persons, as ends in themselves. Even though future generations do not yet exist as identifiable individuals, the moral principle applied to the humanity understood as a continuing moral community. The right based ethics further strengthens the case for duties to the future generations by framing those duties in terms of entitlements rather than benevolence. From this perspective, future generation possesses the moral right to the certain fundamental conditions. These include the right to safe and accessible outer space environment, the right to benefit from scientific discovery, and the right to participate in the shared heritage of humanity. Outer space is often described as the province of all humankind. This phrase has a little meaning if present actors are free to appropriate the resources, occupy strategic locations, and alter the environment in ways that permanently exclude future participation. Right based ethics insists that such exclusion is morally impermissible. The rights of future generation function as constraint on present action. They limit what we may do even when we have the technological capacity to do it. One of the most important areas where intergenerational duties arise is the planetary protection. As discussed earlier, the contamination of celestial bodies may permanently destroy scientific opportunities for future generation. Once a planet or a moon is biologically altered, future scientists lose the ability to study its original state. This is not merely a scientific loss, it is a moral loss because it deprives the future humans of knowledge they have a right to pursue. Ethical responsibility, therefore, demands a precautionary approach. We must err on the side of preservation rather than exploitation. Intergenerational duties also arise in the context of resource extraction. Asteroid mining and lunar resource utilization are often justified as a necessary for economic growth and space development. Yet, these resources are finite. Even if they are extracted rapidly or monopolized by few actors, future generation may inherit a depleted or unequal space environment. Ethical stewardship requires that this resource must be regulated in a way that preserves the long-term availability and equitable access. Another critical dimension of duty to future generation concerns is the governance and institutional design. Decisions made today about the space governance structures will shape the rules under which the future generation will operate. If the space governance becomes fragmented, dominated by the private interest, or militarized, future generation will inherit a system that prioritizes the power over the cooperation. Ethical responsibility therefore includes a duty to design inclusive, transparent, and cooperative government mechanisms that can adapt over time. Militarization of space possesses a particularly severe intergenerational risk. Weapons deployed on orbit or beyond the Earth may create persistent threat that outlast the conflict that give rise to them. Debris from the military activities increases long-term danger. Strategic competition in space risks locking the future generations into the cycles of insecurity. From an intergenerational ethical perspective, militarization represents a failure of stewardship. It prioritizes the short term strategic advantage over the long term collective security. Intergenerational ethics also requires us to consider the concept of sustainability in a broader sense. Sustainability in space is not only about preventing debris or conserving resources, rather, it is about preserving openness, possibility, and the most important, choice. Future generation would inherit a space environment that allows them to decide how they wish to explore, utilize, and relate to the outer space. When we foreclose the options to irreversible actions, we violate this ethical principle. A recurring objection to this intergenerational ethics is that it imposes unfair burdens on the present generation. Why, it is asked, should we limit ourselves for the sake of unknown future persons? In the context of outer space, the objection is particularly weak. The benefits of space activity already accrue disproportionately to a small number of actors. Ethical restraint does not require the present generation to sacrifice the basic needs. It requires that only those with the power to act responsibility and with foresight. Moreover, duties to future generation are not an abstract moral luxury, but they are a practical necessity. Space systems are interconnected. Irresponsible behavior today increases the cost and risk for everyone for tomorrow, including the present generation own descendants. Intergenerational ethics therefore align moral responsibility with enlightened self-interest. As we reflect on the duties to future generation, it becomes clear that outer space exploration is not simply about expanding humanity's physical reach. Rather, it is about defining human character. Will we act as a careful stewards, aware in a place of long-term continuum of human existence, or will we repeat the patterns of exploitation and short-term thinking on a cosmic scale? The ethical framework discussed throughout this lecture converge on a single insight. With a power comes a major responsibility. Technological capability does not confer moral permission. The fact that we can act in outer space does not mean that every possible action is justified. Duties to the future generation demands humility, restraint, and foresight. In concluding this lecture, we can see that ethics in outer space exploration is ultimately about governance across the time. It requires us to imagine the perspective of those who will live with the consequence of our choices. If outer space is truly the shared domain of humanity, then our ethical obligations do not end with ourselves. They extend forward to those who will inherit the cosmos that we leave behind us. Thank you.